Hello all, welcome to our first ever Open LMS Community Speaker Series. My name is Madison, I am the Community Initiatives Manager at Open LMS, and we're happy to have everyone joining us today. Today I have three wonderful speakers that are going to be here to help us talk about the topic of e-learning content. All three speakers are contributors to eLearn magazine. They're Cindy Arthur, Tom Langston, and John Hackmeyer. All three speakers here come to us from different industries and different parts of the world, and they're here to discuss the future of e-learning content with you here today, based on their experiences in their everyday life, in their work, in their jobs. And if I just want to add, if you have not yet explored eLearn magazine and seen the pieces that Cindy, Tom, and John have written for eLearn, I highly recommend you do so. We'll share some links here in the chat. But before we get underway with our discussion, I will hand it over to our speakers to introduce themselves a little bit. So we'll start off with Cindy.
Hi, everybody. My name, again, is Cindy Arthur, and my role is Coordinator of Instructional Technology in our Faculty Teaching and Learning Center at Carl Sandburg College, which is in the United States. We're a small community college with right around 1,075 full-time enrollees. And my main job is to just help our teachers however they need with our open LMS, and then offer help also in any technology question they have or initiative that they would like to explore more. So I'll hand it over to Hack to go next.
Hi, thanks, Cindy. Hey, everybody. So John Hackmeyer here, go by Hack. I am the owner of a consultancy called Cyber Crocodile, and in the past I've done systems engineering and instructional design and a lot of teaching and a lot of content development, and currently help in particular smaller tech companies as they're trying to build sales enablement programs all the way up through even Fortune 10 companies as well.
Hello, I'm Tom Langston. I'm a digital learning and teaching specialist at the University of Portsmouth on the south coast of England. So I'm the one that's getting everyone else up early in the morning to be late in the afternoon. And I work with the sort of central academic development and technology enhanced learning teams on using technology to enhance the pedagogic nature of our teaching. And we have around 27,000 students, a mixture of campus and distance learning students. So it really is now a big mixture of what we kind of offer and can do, especially at the moment where essentially most people are online.
We have three different perspectives coming here, both corporate and higher education in different parts across the world. So hi, we see Polly's coming in from France. If anyone else has some interesting places to share, let us know. This is definitely a global discussion. Oh, look, we have a fellow Portsmouth person logging in. So I will kick off this discussion by asking a pretty overarching question, which is, obviously, the last year has been a year of epic change. We can say year plus at this point. Don't need to dwell on all that happened, but digital content has obviously become much more important for more people than ever before. I wanted to ask what types of digital content all of you have found to be the most effective thus far, and how that has changed or adapted over the last year. How about Tom? Do you want to kick this one off to start?
Yeah. So when all this kind of kicked off, we had a lot of courses that, like I mentioned, were distance learning well before anything like this happened. But it was a radical change and looking at what we could do. And we went with what we've termed the blended and connected model of teaching. And essentially, it was that kind of breaking down what were traditional lectures into smaller chunks to make any contact time much more engaged and personal than just sort of talking to the screen of Zoom, as it were. So yeah, I mean that was kind of sort of the pedagogic rationale. And we sort of did the research into how to try and approach that, but we've also got things in there to to help break it up. So it's not just about watching or reading material, but it's about engaging as well. So using things like H5P inside our VLE to create kind of interactive elements, and again, like other products that we use, like Nearpod or Vvox and things that do audience response things that can also be used inside and outside the classroom. So for us, it was trying to build a portfolio of tools that academics could pick and choose from to give something to their students where engagement was different and contact was different, trying to adapt quickly to that.
Yeah, I would say in my world, because you focus, Tom, on the pedagogic side, and I'm more, since I'm in the corporate, I'm more on the andragogic side, and concerned with the adult learners specifically. And over the last year, it's been interesting because in general, corporations are big into these huge monolithic videos, which are just painful to watch, quite frankly. But as more and more people went remote, they started to realize that they needed to change the way that they broke these things up. You mentioned breaking it into smaller chunks and, letting people focus on potentially a small, shorter video with a single learning objective was really good. I've been doing a lot of that over the last year, as well as even large clients of mine. The largest of them, in fact, is now focusing on things like flipped classroom. And so trying to say, okay, look, we've got a lot of stuff that's really kind of mundane. You got to learn how to do it, but it's just a system thing. And they're making that kind of pre-work, if you will. And then when they start coming into these live virtual classrooms, they're focusing on things that are of much higher value, things like coaching exercises, et cetera. And that's really been the big shift that I've seen, a larger focus since a little more than a year ago.
And I would agree with, Hack and Tom, both of you, whatever the perspective, I think we're all kind of, the delivery had to change, how we were going to do it. Again, we looked at delivery content with video as well. I will say that as far as Carl Sandburg was concerned, we had an advantage over some, I think, in the sense that we already had some things in place. Our open LMS was our go-to, and our teachers and our students knew that. So no matter what the delivery was, whether we were face-to-face or, whatever, they already knew to go there. So we had this common ground that helped us, I think, a little bit, because everything else was all confusing and the world was turned upside down and all that. But at least we had this one thing that was norm that they could go to. And so I think that gave us a leg up a little bit. And then from there, we could just work with the teachers and say, hey, you already got this, you already have this. Now we need to figure out a content delivery that will work for you. What are you comfortable with? What do you need to do? And then we kind of took it from there as the bridge or the springboard on into the rest of how we are going to conduct classes, really. So.
Obviously, so much change could possibly make a lot of people more or less receptive to new content types. How have you found was most effective to introduce people to new types of content or new styles of learning, as you all are talking about kind of breaking things up? I can start with you, Hack. Is it easy to get people to make that change to breaking things up? Has it been more difficult? People more or less willing?
Yeah, change is never easy. That's really the bottom line. People are highly resistant to change, and it's no more evident than in the corporate world for sure. And I think that it's funny in my experience in the corporate world is that people like the idea of change because it's new, it's shiny, and what have you. But the reality is that change is scary for folks. They don't really know exactly how things are going to turn out. There's a little bit of fear there. Then they also have the shock of, oh my gosh, I actually have to do some work here. And, that's never good because they've already got another job. And so, as an enablement professional, and I tell my clients this all the time, I said, look, everybody's on board in these meetings that I have with my clients in the beginning. We're talking about all the great things we can do in enablement. Everybody's fired up. But about 2 weeks later, when the rubber meets the road and I'm asking SMEs to, produce content and do it in a certain way, then it's all of a sudden like, oh, I got all these other responsibilities. So change is difficult, but I will say that usually what I strive for is how easy can I make it for the clients? And so I really spend a lot of time, especially on the instructional design side, trying to show them that creating an effective, interesting video efficiently is possible. And it's really not all that difficult, but they don't know what they don't know because they're not SMEs in what we do. They're SMEs in what they do. So once I have a conversation with them, give them some tips and tricks and kind of get them started, then they start to realize how easy it is. And then the product is a lot better as well.
I would agree with that. And, giving them a little bit and just kind of helping them along the way a little bit, rather than just throwing them in the deep end with something. And then, it's even that much harder. I will say that I felt like, and I agree with you that change is hard and it's scary and so on. But if there was ever a year that I thought we got a free pass on it, this was it. And so that's what I would tell my instructors is like, hey guys, we have to do something. It's okay. We're all in this together. And let's just, let's go after it and let's just see what we can do. Our students have to be our main focus. We have to keep our thoughts and focus on them. And for Hack, I know for you, it was your, in the corporate world, it's a little bit different, but in the end, it's still all the same. We're trying to help somebody with something. And so keeping that focus in mind as far as what we were doing. As far as how we could do it, again, we are small, and that led some huge advantages for us. We could really, I could set up one-on-one phone calls and sessions, team sessions with teachers and talk them through. I could do that with students if I needed to. Library services, academic services, we're literally within feet of each other. And so we could work together to help however we needed to very quickly. So I had some content in a Moodle orientation course, and I try not to be flippant with people and say, hey, I got a whole course over here. You can find whatever you need. Like I didn't want them to think that I didn't want to help. But if they needed something timely and I couldn't get to them, I could say, hey, you could go here and look and see if there's something in there. They're short. I tell you exactly how long they are. I tried to label them very clearly. I'm not trying to waste anybody's time with this. Then we could do the one-on-one sessions with people if we needed to. And then sometimes we'd pull 4 or 5 teachers together. They were all English teachers. They're all math teachers, and they all had the same issues. And so we group up that way and have some discussions. So that's kind of how we handled it. How about you, Tom? I know you were at a much bigger place. So
yeah, but not surprisingly, not that differently, really. It's when I was on campus and training, I'd get 1s or 2s and in a fairly constant flow of people for things. And then this all happened and I was getting 70 online because everyone was afraid and people were like, I need to know something quickly. And you suddenly had the uptake because they needed it. But I think like what sort of Hack was saying at the beginning there as well was they kind of had to learn. Mm-hmm. And even those who were afraid, and like to Cindy's point, even though they were afraid, we were able to sort of say, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. Mm-hmm. It's better to try something than do nothing. And I think people sort of used to come to me being like, I'm a technophobe. I don't like using computers. What they were more afraid of was making themselves look foolish by using a computer to do something where they were more comfortable in. But being that landscape shifted, I think a lot of people were able to kind of at least give something a go. We had to, again, adapt quickly we were already starting a process of change for like a streaming media service. So people had to learn that new system when that got brought in. And it's there was a learning curve, but I think people were surprised how much easier it was than they realized. Mm-hmm. And yes, we had support and sort of training. And like you said, Cindy, we had it got put together very quickly, but really professionally, like the help site for this platform. But we'd still sort of offer training sessions as well to try and capture everyone. So people had something as needed at 3 a.m. when there's no one there to actually support them. But there's also that time where they can jump into you during the day and go, I've tried this last night. I couldn't get it to work, but what did I do wrong? And what you tend to find is in the cold light today, when they try it again when you're there and they've got that safety net again, it's like, oh, I just had to press that button. Oh, I've got it now, thanks. And it was just, and it's amazing how much anxiety I think can cloud your vision from the simplicity of certain things. And that I kind of to Hack and Cindy on this one with, I know we spoke a couple of days ago about this, but actually not worrying about things being perfect. And just actually saying, you know, there can be a bit of mess behind you. We people are living in chaotic home lives these days. It's all right to show that. And again, I don't know how you, obviously, Hack, from you in the sort of business sector, how you kind of deal with that.
With which piece specifically?
Well, just kind of it not necessarily being as professional as people would once expect or thought.
Oh, as far as the content and the training is concerned, yeah, it's one of the hardest things actually for me is trying to get some folks to let their personality come out, right? It's really challenging, especially in a lot of these videos. I work with a lot of tech companies too, and so a lot of my subject matter experts are stereotypically a bit geeky, and they don't always communicate in a way that is interesting for people. Some of them are monotone, whatever. And so they do get a little bit freaked out with stuff like that. And it's important to try to get them to be, you know, confident and understand that you're right. Don't let perfection be the enemy of progress, right? Let's just get something down. But also a couple little suggestions here and there with them as they're going through their presentation with me or looking at a deck really does make a big difference. And I even a lot of times, most of my clients will record their material because they're usually honestly just doing a PowerPoint deck and they're delivering that. But some of them I've noticed when I've received recordings, it's a little bit challenging to watch, quite frankly. And I offer to go ahead and sit in on the next recording so that they have somebody to speak to. And that actually changes it quite a bit, because when they're having a conversation like we're having here, it's much easier for them to be more dynamic and have inflection in their voice and all those other things that when you're talking to yourself a lot of times, it starts to come out like this. We're going to learn about, and they just freeze up. So yeah. And I think once they have that experience and they see what it looks like afterwards, when they're really a lot looser, it makes for a lot better content, a lot more interesting. And then I also talk to them about how to interject things within the presentation, where maybe we take a quick break and do a little knowledge check and we get the person involved and they can kind of cue that up, et cetera. Just ways to break the monotony of talking at somebody, right? It usually helps them quite a bit to loosen up.
Yeah. You know, I'm a big believer in, you know, back when I was a teacher at the high school level, I would always tell my students, you know, I will never expect anything of you that I won't do myself. So that meant that, you know, I need to be vulnerable too, to in whatever, like just doing this today. I mean, this is a new experience for me, but, you know, it's like I've been telling our faculty all year, you know, it's okay, put yourself out there. Your students want to see you as you are. It just helps normalize everything, and the perfection piece can kind of get out of the way a little bit of things. So I've taken that approach. Maybe it's a excuse that if I can't do it perfect, it's not going to be perfect. I have to be okay with it. I have to be, because I have to move on. We can't spend hours on just this one little thing. And you know, some of that's just how you are, but we can all learn to move past that a little bit, I think. I know one of the services that we, you know, with doing video content, and I keep bringing that up, but I think, I don't know, for me, maybe it's the learning style I am. I mean, I know from universal design, you know, you need to be able to offer it in multi ways. But I don't think anything can replace some video, even if it's just introducing, let somebody know who you are a little bit. But we started using the Instilled plugin, and it was, that's offered through the Open LMS, you know, it was in beta at the time, and I think we're going to move forward with it. But we needed a way that was quick, easy. You didn't have to go this other place, get it, download it, get a link. You know, we needed something that was simple. And for me, that was one of the big ones that came up this year for us. And I'm excited about where that's going to, because we can't ask people to, you know, they can't go, like Hack, you said, I mean, we live in this world, they don't. And, you know, that's not their main focus. So we have to make it as easy as we can for them. So that was one thing that we did with the Open LMS that was exciting for me, was to have that tool.
And bringing it a little back to the student perspective, because Cindy started to address that a little bit with not clicking out, making sure things live in one place. We had a question here about kind of encouraging people to address material ahead of time. And to me, that also speaks to, we discussed a little bit at the beginning, flipped classrooms, hybrid learning styles. How do you help both teachers and students understand how to kind of engage with this content on a different level, pick up a different cadence with it, you know, with addressing certain things before that you might have thought you'd address in a lecture, but now that lecture time is limited?
If I jump in on that, just we, as I mentioned, we've got that sort of the flipped blended classroom kind of idea where you have the lecture material first and then the discussion afterwards. And it's quite interesting to sort of see that comment of, you know, people are coming to it almost too late to get to do anything else with it. And I think one of our academics kind of almost embraced that and went the other way with it, which was rather than, yes, they had the materials up there so they could read it beforehand, but because some students weren't necessarily doing that approach, they do the seminar with the expectation that they need to then almost scare them into knowing that they didn't realize a lot of stuff. So it's what they do is do the higher level thing in a seminar type situation in that discussion area to build the confidence up of the students. But when they then go and look at the material, they've got some sort of grounding and foundation to what they're about to look at. Whereas when they come to it and start reading it, if they don't understand it, they can't actually ask a question. They can't get, and it's almost disenfranchising them from proceeding any further. So I get the point of wanting them to get to it beforehand, but actually maybe don't. Maybe turn it on its head and scare them straight. But again, obviously, I don't know what position they're coming from a business perspective, from a school, college, you know, university. But yeah, I think from my perspective, it's good to try and do that way. You preload it first, but if it's not working that way, flip it the other way. Make it something else, and get them to do the research after they realize what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and it's funny, in my experience, I think just generally, not even professionally necessarily, people are motivated by different factors. Some people are motivated by carrots, some people by sticks, right? And fear. And I think in the corporate world, honestly, we use a little bit of all of that to motivate people, because sometimes if you have, especially I work a lot since I'm in sales enablement with salespeople. Salespeople are, generally speaking, highly competitive. So we try to set things up so that they know they've got some pre-work to do, which they're not necessarily looking forward to. But then when they say, okay, you know, we're after this pre-work, you're going to be in a webinar and be coaching and having to do things, then they realize, man, I better have my act together, because when I get in there, I don't want to look like a fool in front of, you know, my manager and all my peers. So there's a little bit of that. It's not terribly difficult to get them motivated, but you have to send a message out that is multifaceted so that you motivate the different types of people, either with carrots or sticks, whatever it happens to be. But it seems to be pretty consistent, at least in my world.
Yeah.
I think that's a great perspective from both sides there. And it goes to, there's no one right way to teach. And even as from both an accessibility standpoint, like Cindy mentioned, and from just a general, there are different types of learners in the world standpoint, it's really important that, you know, learning is approached that way. And I think that we're seeing more of that as we are moving increasingly digital, and there are more options for people to engage with content. Do you think that moving forward after an experience like the past year, people are more willing to incorporate more content types moving forward, even as people go back to some in-person trainings, go back into classrooms? Do you think there's a willingness to offer more types of learning to allow people to with different learning styles to absorb the content from multiple directions? I'll let Cindy start with this one.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. We said at the same time, anyone can start.
I do personally. Again, I always try to think if I was a student in my class, would I like it? Would it work for me? And so, I need to be, as a student, I needed to be able to go back and review and look at things a second time and a third time, or I'm doing my homework now and I still can't quite understand that concept. Well, if there is a video that the teacher produced, even if it was an hour long and part of it was clunky or whatever, if I can get back to one part and review it and look at it again, then that's a good thing. And so, again, I think the student has to be the focus, but if that's good, then I think we should keep doing it. We had an initiative at one point to make sure that our grades we were all using the grade book within our open learning management system. And again, I know some universities do that, some don't, whatever. But again, I always said, if you want your students to be successful and you want them, they need to know where they're at pretty much at all times. I'm not saying within 5 minutes, but they need to know. And so make that available to them, those types of things. So, that will stay continued. Discussion boards, just because you meet face to face, you can have a lot of students that are very shy, introverted students. I was one of those people, and I won't speak up that much in a whole group. But if I can do it another way and deliver some things that way, then yes. So I think all those things have a place. And I think at least for our school, our teachers are awesome and they're seeing that and they're willing to keep doing it for sure. How about you, Tom?
I was just going to say on that kind of what's worked and what hasn't. One of our academics came to me and was like, being that we've been on Zoom all this time, it's been amazing having the chat box. Is there any way we can do that in person? Mm-hmm. And it so happens that with one of our tools, we can do that. Mm-hmm. There's essentially they can use their phone or a laptop, or whatever their device is, but they can have a sort of a chat box so that they can ask questions while the teacher's presenting or other discussions are happening. And you can have that sort of Zoom-esque thing in person without having to use Zoom, WebEx, Google Meet, whatever it is you're using. Right. So it's like you say, creatively thinking around problems that people are now going, actually, what I've liked in this lockdown teaching, I want to bring forward, but I have no idea how to. And I think going forward as well, we're very much trying to sort of keep that flipped, blended approach. I think where appropriate is probably a good way of putting it, because there are certain courses where it doesn't work as well, but they want to do certain things that they couldn't do before now in a digital way. And I think we need to try and be flexible and meet those needs of each different course subject, and right. what works for English Lit may not work for engineering. Right. But actually there are going to be crossover bits that will work for each other. And I think what's been nice is being able to kind of see now a much broader look across the university of what's best practice and what people have done with things to keep that engagement in. Even if that people aren't turning their cameras on, they might actually engage with the material using a particular tool or a particular concept that they can then discuss in a certain way.
Right.
Yeah. It's funny. I love what you guys are saying, but admittedly, I'm a little bit of a cynic, probably because I spend so much time in the corporate world. I don't know if it's cynicism or pragmatism, but it's funny. I just see that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Mm-hmm. And at least that's what I've noticed. And there are some exceptions to that rule, like there are for everything. But it's funny how people are still. We're doing this now, but one of my largest clients is already planning now to have people back in offices in the fall, and kind of going back to corporate travel and all these other things, and kind of getting back to what everybody calls normal, right? So there's still this kind of hesitation to make this thing permanent, if you will. and there's the desire for that face-to-face physical interaction as well. What I have found interesting, though, is how I've tried to get people to look differently at their content, not so much about how they're putting it together, but how they're checking people's knowledge, the quizzing aspect of it. And that's just an area where I've been able to work with some subject matter experts who are realizing there are different ways to validate the knowledge of their students. And it doesn't all have to be, multiple choice, single select types of answers. And so once we start talking about creating maybe some branch scenarios or doing some drag and drops, I mean, it's little stuff. You wouldn't think it's all that, it's not rocket surgery, but it's still something where people are like, oh, that's a little bit different. Now I can see the value of that. And they start to get different results from their students, in their, whether it's their salespeople, sales engineers, or whatever. And what they're starting to notice is that it's not just the content stuff. It's how are we validating the knowledge that's making a difference. And in the end, in my world, everything comes down to the business results. That's all that matters. And so if they're looking at how do I decrease ramp time, how do I increase retention, how do I get faster times to productivity? And I can do little things like that, and they may be different from what they've seen before. That's all they really care about. Yep. All right, my ramp time just went down by 50%, which means productivity, time to productivity just went up, or was decreased, and now they're productive more quickly. Then that's really what it comes down to. They seem to be a little more up for change when I can link it to that than just, oh, this is different and kind of cool. It has to still come back to the business value.
Right.
Assessment is a really interesting part to explore. Obviously, I'm going to make an assumption that in the past year, there's probably been, from the higher education side, a lot more assessment that is more open than it used to be, whether they're open book exams or different style of exams. And maybe in the past, it wasn't as creative with assessment as Hack has been able to implement on the corporate side, because there's kind of a little more of a storied history there. Has anyone seen anything with changing assessment? Any more student success, positive student feedback, negative student feedback from that?
The bit I know my colleague's been working on, which stemmed from a presentation he saw at the beginning of lockdown, is about like non-Googleable questions and how to design assessment around that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of tips that you can do, because again, lots of people tend to like grab an image from Google, which you can then, depending on the time frame you have to work in an exam, you can reverse image search and get an answer, or it may be labeled in alt text. Whereas if you take the photo yourself and give it a generic alt text, you can design questions around what they can see, which would again relate back to the concepts they've taught, rather than like Hack said, sort of a multiple choice question that is the traditional go-to A, B, or C. So we've seen a lot of different ways of people trying to do assessment. I think there's also, from our element though, the problem is essentially in their like unit handbooks or module handbooks, they're given a very rigid description of what their assessment will be. So it's trying to change that while stick to the bit that the student is expecting. But I think it does, going forward, allow for a lot more creative design of assessment and creative application of assessment, and what is it you're trying to test? Because I've got friends who work in industry and business, and like even my children say Google is their best friend. It's just because you don't necessarily need to know things anymore, but you need to know how to apply the knowledge you find, and that is the skill of, I can search for something about engineering. I couldn't tell you what to do with it afterwards because I've got no baseline knowledge of engineering. So I think it's a lot about how we design questions and how we go about testing people, rather than having a right or wrong answer. Equally though, I know academics don't want to add to their workload of having to mark when you can get things a lot more automated in things that are designed for just that process. Cindy, how does it work at sort of the college you're at?
Yeah, we could talk for hours, I think, about assessment, even before this, but now, we have another layer to it. And it's interesting because I had that written down, the assessment piece. And we have an event coming up. We do it every year. It's called Tech Connect, where it's an internal workshop day for our instructors. And since assessment was such a big, it has been talked about a lot. That's one of the areas that we're focusing on, and we're bringing in some people that have some different backgrounds in it. And we're going to have some very lively discussions. We're doing it through our Teams format, but we did some flipped learning ahead of time. They could, put down how they are assessing, what the struggles are, what they'd like to be able to do moving forward. The one thing I think it does bring up is, and again, maybe this is just my teaching background, but I was never a believer that you just go along, give a midterm, however that is, and then you go along, and give a final. To check understanding along the way is extremely important. I don't care if we're talking the corporate world, we're talking the education world. I don't care, because you have, that's important. And so, because then if the students do feel comfortable and they've got that framework, and then they can apply it, they can think on their feet and do all those things that they need to do in the corporate world. And that job is, as a teacher, I think is extremely important, and one that, and I'm not blaming anybody, I'm not saying anything. I just think that we need to look at it closer, and we always have, and maybe this has just brought it to the light a little bit more. We have a lot of program areas. So we have nursing, paramedics, mortuary science, dental hygiene, and all those people are dictated by accreditation and their pass-fail rates. So again, Hack, in your world, I know it's, but for us, it's our success rates. We won't keep our programs if we don't have success. And so in a way, it's the same. That's our sales piece, I guess you'd say. And so those people analyze things to death and look at things and look at concepts and how we're going to make it better. But in the end, those students have to take a high stakes test that is multiple choice, multiple guess, case study. And so we're doing them a disservice if we don't keep, offering them that method of doing it, because in the end, that's what they're going to have to do. And so I like the idea of what I call creative assessments. Let their passion come out, give them some choices, let them pick the one they like. And that's awesome. I love it. But there is this other point that if you're going to go be a nurse, you're going to have to go past that big test. If you're going to be a dental hygienist, you're going to have to go take that big test. And we are doing you a disservice if we don't somehow prepare you along the way for that.
Yeah, Tom, you nailed it on the head with what you said in that. And I try to tell people all the time, nobody cares about what you know. It's too easy to know things now, because in the information age where Google exists and all these things, you can know just as much as anybody else. Knowing things isn't really magical anymore. Now, how you use what you know is the differentiator. And, and especially in my world in sales, right? Salespeople have to learn about the products and solutions offered by their companies, and they can know all the facts inside and out, and that's great. But that doesn't really help you sell. You have to be able to use that information in a compelling way and show how that's, and tell a story to a prospect about how that solves the business problems. So same thing. And I say the same thing to my kids, like, I'm not impressed by what you know. That's great. Anybody can figure that out. How do you use it, right? And talk about all the time.
That's my son is in medical sales, and he goes through all these trainings of, role playing things. And so, hopefully you have every situation, come up. So when you get to that 2 minutes in the elevator with the doctor, you can tell them what you need to. But, and I'm not just bragging on my son, but his background was in this world of orthopedics, and he grew up with that, and he just knows that. I mean, so because that doctor is always going to ask a question that you didn't role play for. So if you have the right knowledge behind you, then you can think on your feet. And I guess that was my point about it has to be so much a part of what you are that you can then, carry through. And it isn't something you can just Google and look up. So.
Agreed.
And talking about kind of these creative ways for assessment and new approaches leads me to ask the question, all three of you are in positions where you are educating others about new strategies, content, techniques. Where do you go to find that information? Do you guys have particular publications you enjoy, or are there influencers, we could say, or people in the space that you're most interested by, or is it just trial and error, searching to find out a certain problem?
I'll be honest with you. I'm no different than anybody else. I Google a lot of stuff, and it's because, again, the information's there. So, I'll go and Google, but I'll look at a lot of different sources to try to see things. And I also use influences from my personal life and other things that I teach outside of my kind of corporate persona. But yeah, for me, it's just a simple thing of, and I will read magazines and stuff like that. I'll, get, something from, an organization like ATD as an example, and kind of see what's, up and coming, et cetera. But what I've found with a lot of those things is that one of two things: either they're very trendy and they're shiny right now, and they don't really kind of last very long, and or they are really cool, but a little bit too difficult. When I say difficult, it costs time and money, right, to be able to do it. And my clients don't have time for that. So they're like, well, yeah, it would be great to do this really cool thingamajig and this new way of learning and teaching and all that. But how many hours is that going to take you to put together? And how much is that going to cost me? This. They're like, no, not going to work, right? You just can't do it. So not everything. I mean, again, it's good to be aware of different things, the augmented reality, virtual reality, and all these different things that people are like, oh, this is great stuff. Well, sure. If you have both the time and money, which are basically the same thing, to be able to throw at it, that's fine. But yes, keep it simple, stupid is usually what I find to be most effective.
Yeah. Tom, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, I mean, it's one that's not to sound too sycophantic to my work colleagues, but what's quite nice about the team I'm made up of is we all bring something to the table that someone else doesn't know. So I'm slightly more techie advanced than others, but I've got colleagues who are, know the literature inside and out. So what works nicely is we can we have regular meetings and discussions about this, so that if we find something and we come up against, or we want to solve a problem, we put it to the team. The team use Slack as a form of communication. So there's lots of threads that you may not ever look at, but other people are chatting away. And then if you ever need it, you've got a resource there. Again, like Hack said, Google is great as a sort of jumping off point. I try and use Google Scholar for the more academic side of it as well. But we also have the library, who provide access to lots of literature and research papers and ebooks and all that kind of stuff. So, but then it comes back to that point, doesn't it? Of how do you filter? You can bring back loads of resources. How do you know which one to go with? And again, sometimes it can just be almost your own kind of experience and common sense. The more we do this, and like Cindy sort of said, her son's background has sort of put him instead to now do sales, because the doctor will throw a question at him and he'll know it because of other experience. And I think all three of us now have been doing our jobs kind of long enough to have at least some sort of understanding of, you may not know the answer, but you know someone that does, and you can jump using the connections you have. So I think it's a definite mixture for me of the research that's widely available on Google, but being able to ask someone else about the validity of it, or have you tried this before? Did this work? Where do we go from here?
Yeah. No, I'd agree with both of you. I think it's probably been 7 years ago now, when Twitter was, it was already out, but I had just drugged my feet on it. I'm like, it's just so silly, 20 some characters or whatever. What good is that? Hashtags, it just seems all confusing. Well, I had a former student tell me that, he said, you are always one that wasn't afraid to jump in on things. And I promise you, if you will look into Twitter a little bit more and get us to focus, you're going to find that it's a good resource if you want it to be. And so again, you know, he was one of my favorite students from back away. So I took him up on it. And now it is probably one of my go-tos for so many things, you know, to follow a hashtag like higher ed, or to follow a hashtag VR, or, you know, whatever. And then from there, I can sort out some things that I want to look at. You know, in my position, I feel some pressure in a good way. And again, you know, I don't even know if I like the word cutting edge, but we need to keep our focus, you know, to what else can we offer? What else can we do? And we need to be able to experiment with it some, like you were saying about AR and VR. You know, it can be disastrous. It's time consuming, it's expensive, but I don't really think it's going to totally go away. And so at some point I felt like we needed to jump in there a little bit and work through some things. And so with that being said, I use Twitter a lot, which has helped me get to people. And I have found educators, maybe it's different in the corporate world, but in the education world, people are willing to really share. And the ego thing is not an issue ever. Like even just in this last week, I've reached out to someone at 3 different colleges because of something I saw, and we're going to have a meeting and they're going to tell me what they're doing at their college for some kind of fellowship or research study or whatever. That's awesome, you know? And so then I can bring that back and I'll get some people to look at it, and we can go from there. EduCause is another resource I use a lot to just look at trends of some things. We have a network of all the Illinois community colleges. We meet about once a month, and lots of good, valuable information come out of that. There's some podcasts I listen to. In fact, one of the people that it's going to do our Tech Connect, she has a podcast that she does once a week, I think it is, with all kinds of topics. You know, so those are my go-to right now, along with all my good people just at the school, like what you were saying, Tom, that I continually try to reach out to. But I think that's why education is so fun, is because, you know, they used to say it keeps you young. I think it does. It keeps you around stuff. It's constantly changing. You get to be around energized people. You know, I wouldn't trade it for anything, to be honest. So
I love what you said there, Cindy, because it kind of brings it full circle for me when you talk about people are willing to share. And I used to be, you know, I was a graduate student at one time, and I was in academia, and I was like, all right, everybody's about, you know, information sharing. And then I got into the corporate world. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. No, it's information hoarding. And people started, I started to realize very quickly that people thought they had a distinct advantage if they didn't share information with you. And they would, because people would say, oh yeah, you know, knowledge is power. I'm like, no, it's really not. Knowledge is knowledge. It's the utilization of knowledge that gives you power. Again, it goes back to, I don't care what you know, right? Mm-hmm. I care how you use what you know. And I've always been an information share. I'm happy to share anything I know with anybody who needs it. And if it came down to a competition, I just believe that I'm going to be better at using it than you are, and I'll still beat you. So, but it's funny, but in the corporate world, it is not. Information hoarding is much more prevalent than information sharing, for sure. And it was a very difficult transition for me when I first got into this world, and trying to get people to understand, no, it's the information is not the secret, right? Almost everybody has sight, but very few people have vision. And that's really where the difference is between having knowledge and being able to utilize it.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point, though, in that obviously academics are very good at sharing certain parts of their knowledge, but actually they're almost like you sort of say, Hack, where they wouldn't want to necessarily share all their course material because that's the stuff I've produced and it's mine. But I think MOOCs came along and almost destroyed some of that. But again, the funny bit of there with MOOCs is people from like MIT are putting out their courses and they're like, oh my goodness, MIT are giving away this stuff. The percentage of people that complete it because of that understanding and the level it takes to maintain an MIT course, the drop-off rates are phenomenal. It's like I've done a few MOOCs, and it's very hard to sort of stick to the end because you're doing other stuff as well, because it's not your only source of information and you're not your only daily life. Right. So it's I think there is a lot of sharing of best practice in higher education and in education. And I think a lot of people especially at school level, I think they're a lot more open to course sharing materials. I know I've got friends who are teachers who share, PowerPoints for geography or history or whatever it might be, and they're a lot more free to give it away, because I think the course material is written at a much more standardized level than maybe it is between the experts that would teach in higher education. And that's not belittling anything under that, because to be honest, I don't know how you guys do it. But I think it is very much a balancing act between what they will share and what they won't. And so it's not completely utopian over here, Hack. Don't worry.
It's not all unicorns and rainbows, because it sounds
not,
like.
No. So someone in the chat's put Susan's put academic share, but only to a point. And I think it's almost like they'll share concepts and share best practice ideas, but they may not share kind of produced material that's very subject specific. And again, it will depend on the subject they're teaching. And for instance, like computing, because there's lots of open source stuff, there'll be more, and you've got like things like GitHub now, where lots of that is kind of freely available. That really comes down to a kind of, it's not necessarily content, it's context of how you produce a program to do what you need it to do. So that's a lot more shared. But there is other people where maybe they're going to sell it as a book or a publication or whatever, that knowledge becomes a lot more walled off, because that's the bit I can monetize.
Yeah. So all we have to do is solve for ego. Is that what I'm hearing? Perfect. That should be easy.
It's all right. I'm British. I have no ego.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah, that point of collaboration is so important. And I think it loops back to the bigger conversation around accessibility, which we touched on a bit, and having access for people across the world. A newest initiative here at Open LMS is we are slowly releasing all of our code that was closed source previously over the course of the year. And that is also just to increase accessibility to the products we've created and have more people be able to take advantage of those. But to kind of touch on as a last point here, accessibility and content is a really important aspect. How have you guys gone about, or you all, my apologies, gone about approaching accessibility as you are launching these new content types? Does anyone want to start there? It's a big question, but a little dive in.
Again, I'm happy to start for the fact that we're kind of covered by, despite Brexit, the EU kind of accessibility legislation that came out. So a lot of things that we've been doing have been about helping people understand how to put accessibility into their PowerPoints, into their PDFs. It's why we went with the video platform we did, because it automatically transcribes and all that kind of stuff. So I think depending on depends on how you're defining accessible as well. Is it the accessibility of understanding the material, or the physical barriers to certain accessibility things? But I think for us, it's been a big project. And again, I've got colleagues who've done a lot more on this than I have, but we're pushing on both fronts. We've recently, I think the university's recently hired sort of an inclusivity and diversity director. We've got people working on the nuts and bolts of making things accessible no matter what you are. And I think what we've tried to get out to our sort of academic body is the more accessible you make something, you're not pandering to a small minority, you're making it better for everybody. And I think that's the message we've been really trying to push. And I think most people have been really trying hard to do it where they can. And it is just sort of changing mindsets very slowly to make sure that they're able to do it. And and again, to provide the support materials to do it. But like you say, it's such a big subject and very daunting for people that haven't sort of necessarily thought about it in the past. It's kind of where do we go from here?
Yeah, it's easy for me. We just don't address it, quite frankly. It is what it is. It's not something that is focused on in the corporate world. I've talked to people about it, that nobody, again, if they don't have a direct need for it, then they're not going to justify spending the money, because as you know, it takes time, which means it costs money to be able to produce things that are accessible by everybody, and screen readers and all the different things that come into this stuff. quite frankly, we don't really address it. It's not really something that I've seen, at least in my practice.
Sorry to jump in over you, Cindy, but just on Hack's point there, because obviously I don't know much about the American side of this, but like I say, under the EU thing, the way we're covered is you can't, like, if it's an open public website, it has to be accessibility compliant. That, like, all public facing websites need to have accessibility statements, and there can be essentially financial and lawsuits against it. So is that something, do you know, I don't know if that's something that's going to happen in the US. I don't know.
I would be shocked. I haven't seen it in my experience anyway, and just very few. And I had a client last year, as a matter of fact, that was a county and I live in Georgia, but down in Florida, it was a county, and I did some work for them. And a lot of times once you start getting into governmental things, then you do have that requirement. I didn't even have it there. They're like, yeah, whatever, just make the stuff and let's go. So no, I haven't seen any real demand.
It's more case by case. Prior to this position with eThink and then Open LMS, I worked at a university, and for example, to edit our part of the website, I was required to take an accessibility course and pass a certain examination, but there, as far as I know, are no widespread protections from all website point of view that we have to live up to. Sydney, what are your experiences there?
Yeah, we, again, and this was before my time at the college, but I thought we're ahead of the curve on some things. And one of them was accessibility. And so we started an initiative, it's probably been 5 years ago now, to start little bit by little bit, start making sure our content was meeting accessibility guidelines. So PowerPoints, videos, PDFs, whatever we were putting in a course. And as a lot of schools, the syllabus is a big piece. So again, we had a template that every teacher had to use the same one, the basic framework of it. And obviously we wanted to make sure that was accessible. So we actually went with a third-party company that helped us make sure that it was. I mean, there was no way around it. So I think we have really taken the approach that, again, it's a service to our students to do this. Even for me, closed captioning, I love it. I mean, when I'm watching something, I'm in a place where I can't have volume turned up if closed captioning is available and I can watch it that way. I mean, that's one of the ones that really stuck with me the most, I think, really. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing. And I know we try to be proactive and rather than reactive and have a case against us and then, everything falls apart kind of idea. So
small things really make big differences, as like you're saying, Sydney, like closed captioning, that's great for everyone. It's not good, bad for anyone.
Yeah.
And right before I kind of hand it back over to our speakers for a moment to kind of wrap up anything they'd like to say, I will say May 20th is World Accessibility Day. For those that are not aware, at Open LMS, we will have kind of another community style session like this featuring some of our team members who are very interested in accessibility, have spent a lot of time working on it, that will kind of give people a chance to dive in more if they're interested. And we will send out information about that soon on the same channels you found information about this and there will be 4 time zones for that. So we should cover the globe for people interested in accessibility. So I will turn it back over to our speakers in case they have any last things. Each of these incredible speakers are wonderful professionals. This is just a small part of what they do, spending an hour with me discussing content. So I want to allow them to wrap up with anything they'd like to. So I'll start off with Hack.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity. It's been great. I've enjoyed it. And for those of you out there, anybody interested in, chatting with me or giving me your opinion, your feedback on anything that I've said, feel free. You can always look me up on LinkedIn, and happy to make that connection and share information, because I'm all good about that.
Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you. I have, there's the Telltales blog that myself and my team work on. That's teltales.port.ac.uk. And I haven't done it for a while, granted, but there is a podcast on there, which is also on like Apple, Spotify, and all that kind of stuff, I think. At least I tried to get it there. And Again, like Hack, I'm on LinkedIn, and my Twitter is @TomEduTrainer, which is TOMEDU trainer. But you're probably better off following the team one, which is @TellPortsmouth, because they're much more proactive on Twitter than I am. I'm like Cindy, I love Twitter and I do use it actually quite a lot, but I don't necessarily post a lot, but I have lots going on in my feed.
Yeah. Again, we have a universal or an email that's ftlc@sandberg.edu. Anybody that would have any questions or would like to continue some conversations about anything with education in general, I would love to be a part of it. And I've just enjoyed the experience of being here today and having a chance to share.
Really, thank you all so much for your time here. Thank you everyone for listening in on this, or anyone who is catching this later on YouTube as a recording. We shared in the chat the wonderful speakers pieces in eLearn magazine, as you can see there. If you are interested in contributing a story to eLearn magazine, our wonderful editorial team is willing and welcome to take any stories you have. You can see below on the ticker line there. You can email manuel.rivera@elearnmagazine.com to share your stories. And I just want to thank everyone so much. I encourage everyone to look over to our community.openlms.net, where you can continue conversations. That community is open to everyone, the whole community, clients, non-clients, everyone, to have more discussions, talk about technology and e-learning strategies. But I appreciate everyone's time here, and we look forward to another speaker series next quarter. But thank you to all three of you, and thank you to everyone for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.